Hello there, my name is Kathy Greven of Greven & Co. We're accountants and financial planners, where we create a better financial life for our clients. While people expect the bare minimum, we challenge them to expect far more. This video provides general and factual information known at the time of production and should not be used as advice, as your circumstances are unique, and this video has not taken that into consideration. We recommend you reach out to us and get specific advice relative to your circumstances.
Welcome, Chantel, and thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Now, I wanted to jump and dive right in and ask you, what is the weirdest or craziest reason someone has wanted to borrow money?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think I must have really boring clients because I really can't think of anything too strange apart from my first ever week in finance. And what I didn't know at the time was the lady was asking for money. She told me it was for home improvements, and it was actually to invest in pokie machines.
Oh.
Yes, and I learned very quickly that's why you check loan people's statements, actually. So that was probably the weirdest thing ever, but you can't give money for gambling.
No, definitely not. Well, I suppose if you owned a pub, yes, and you're buying machines, yes, but not to put money into the poker machines.
No,
that wouldn't fly with the banks at all. No, definitely not.
Yeah.
Okay.
I learned a lot about lending in that first week, let me tell you.
I can imagine. How many years have you been in finance?
13.
13. Lucky 13, hey?
Yes.
Very good. And we're all going through COVID-19 at the moment. So what's different about lending with COVID-19?
Yeah, okay, these are good questions. So there's lots different. Two major differences. So one difference is we really need to make sure that if people are affected by the current circumstances, what are their plans to rectify? And that's a really difficult thing to determine because we don't necessarily have a supposed light at the end of the tunnel that has a clear pathway. So I'll give you an example. So if somebody is operating a pub, we know that restrictions are getting reduced, but we don't know how quickly they can get back to normal and what would the impacts be if there was a second round, perhaps of, illness and how that affects. So with that in mind, it's really changed the landscape a lot for us. From a commercial point of view, there's a couple of funders that we use a lot for self-managed super fund loans, and they've been fantastic to deal with. However, recently they've reduced their loan ratios from 80% on the commercial property down to 70%. And that's not great when you've planned for somebody to have an 80% loan. So it's about, I guess, having some patience to work out, is it even best to proceed with a purchase at the moment, or is it better to delay and working out what their long-term strategy is. So that's from, I guess, a commercial super point of view. A commercial business owner, if they're affected, it's really hard to answer. It really depends on the situation. And then with home lending, again, we need to make sure, does the person have a secure position? Do they feel that their employer can manage through this? Are they on JobKeeper? And how does that impact them as well? And then again, look at, is it the right time to buy or refinance?
Right. And what are how are the banks handling COVID-19 then, like dealing with what the government has thrown at them? And of course, the government hasn't been too nice to the banks, but you know, I'm sure the bank has had to move faster than lightning to try and implement these changes. So, what are the banks doing now?
Yes, I'm very pro-client, but this is one time where I really feel for the banks because they're a business and the government announced something and they needed to change their business virtually overnight. And there's one major bank in particular that lost a huge amount of their workforce with shutdowns or lockdowns in Manila. So when the banks were already struggling with turnaround times prior to this happening, it's really put them in a compromised position because one, not only have they lost staff, but they've also had to relocate staff to home as well. And that's not a 5-minute exercise. You know, there's a lot of things that have to happen with that. So one bank in particular, quite unfortunate, a loan document would take, let's say, 24 hours, maximum 48 hours. With them in the past, they were very good with loan documentation. Now it can take 22 business days. So they're, I guess, managing it in the best way they possibly can with the manpower they have, but it's not been easy. We are starting to see a little bit of softening this week though. So some of the in-application progress timeframes have reduced, which is fantastic. They were blown out with a lot of the banks. In fact, they were blown out as well before this, got worse, and now we are seeing the softening. One bank in particular has got better than pre-COVID, which has been interesting.
Wow.
Yes. And even from, I guess, a broker point of view, we have what we call a credit hotline with most of the banks. So it's a 1300 number that we phone in if we've got an interesting scenario. And most of the banks don't have them available at the moment. They've had to allocate those credit assessors to support applications, and our communication can only be via email to them.
Wow. So I was going to ask you, in your 13 years, what is the quickest loan application you've processed?
Right. So in the bank or as a broker?
Well, either.
Either. Okay. So when I first started lending, I think restrictions were a little bit different then. And I worked for a bank where we could actually, we did the loan interview, identified the client, did the valuation, printed the loan documents, and settled that loan in 3 hours.
3 hours?
3 hours. Now that is unheard of now, let me tell you. Very, very unheard of now because systems have changed, and we could approve the application and print out loan documents on the spot and then settle that.
So,
excuse me.
So in contrast to that, what is the longest it's taken you to get an application, or you're still working on that?
Yeah. Yeah. The longest would probably be now, you know, so with application that we had approved during this period and waiting 22 business days just for loan documentation. I mean, it was embarrassing to tell the client. And the only way we can escalate is for domestic violence or homelessness. And thankfully, these people don't qualify.
Yes, very true. And do you, in COVID-19 style, are there any tips or tips or traps that people should be aware of when they're looking to borrow money now?
Yes, okay, that's another really good question. The biggest hurdle we have when somebody comes in is excess personal spending, because we really need to go through their accounts and determine what their average expenditure has been over the last 3 months.
Right.
Now, some banks will look at it over a longer period, but traditionally now it's about 3 months. And people will say, oh, well, I won't go out as much when I purchase a property, or I won't spend so much on clothes, or whatever it is.
Yes.
And that doesn't quite cut it so much anymore. People really need to show the behaviours, in a sense, that the bank wants to see and make sure that they can afford it. And there's been plenty of times in the past, and we're ramping this up in a different way now, where we'll say to people, how about for the next 3 to 6 months, you actually think twice before you spend a couple of $100 at the pub, or you go out on a spending spree that you don't need. Because mentally, once they start restricting their spending, they've built up the behaviours and it becomes really easy. Now it's a little bit different because people can't go out the same way they could before. And so we know that their entertainment expenses are going to naturally reduce whether they like it or not. So it's an interesting position to we don't know how the banks will look at it. Will they look at it as, yes, they've proven capacity, or will the banks look at it as, well, they didn't have a choice?
Yeah.
And we still need to apply an expense to that. And we are finding online sales have increased, and I really, really encourage people to think 2-3 times before they do online purchases, particularly if they're wanting to either refinance or purchase something.
So when you say online purchases, things like PayPal, or buy something through Facebook, or something of that nature, or eBay, Gumtree, whatever. That really
absolutely. Yes. And I think now's probably making people more aware of what they're spending. I had one business owner say to me that they've saved $20,000 in 1 month just on entertainment, and they can't travel. So they're now starting to get excited because they're saying, well, we didn't realise how much it was costing us before, and now they do. So we know that their behaviour is going to change regardless in the future. So there's some real positives out of it, that's for sure. And we do tell people that if they're purchasing, they haven't purchased before, that they should save the equivalent to the mortgage repayments plus about 2.5%, just so they get into that habit.
Very true, very true. And finally, why should people use a broker? Why should they go to a broker and not go straight to their bank or to a bank?
Yes, most brokers are pro-client or pro-person, I should say. And most brokers really have a love for people. And it's not the job of getting somebody a loan. It's our reward is the feeling of what we produce for a person. We're in people's lives for their milestones, for their happiest moments, for their saddest moments. We go through the divorce with them and the marriage and the children and the new business or whatever it is, we're there for them. But typically a broker will have the heart to want to go through that and to make it possible. And we care. I'm not saying bank lenders don't do this, but in a bank, mostly, not all banks, but you're on a time limit as to how much time that lender can spend with a client.
Right.
As a broker, you will typically give the client the time they need, not the time that your KPI dictates. And there's a big difference there when you're trying to help people make their dreams come true.
Well, that's true. And buying a house is, you know, the great Aussie dream, isn't it?
It is.
It is. That's it.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Chantel. That was very informative and hopefully not too scary for you.
Thank you. It was wonderful. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. My pleasure.